The Oakland Raiders firing of Ken Norton Jr. was racist. Blacks still last hired, first fired. On Tuesday, the Oakland Raiders reported that head coach Jack Del Rio fired his defensive coordinator and friend of 25 years, Ken Norton Jr. I don't believe Coach Del Rio made that move on his own because of the logical inconsistencies that are attached to it, as well as the last hired, first fired pattern. It's a truism in American society that African Americans have historically been the last to be hired for a position and then the first to be released from it. In Coach Norton's case, after Del Rio was brought in as head coach, the Raiders took some time to hire a defensive coordinator and talked to a number of candidates, all white, before settling on Norton. Defensive expert Todd Bowles, who is now the head coach of the New York Jets, was interviewed to be head coach, not defensive coordinator. At that point, the Raiders were talking to black head coaching candidates but not hiring them, except former Raider Rod Woodson. The vast majority of hires were white. Then the Raiders brought in Norton, last hired. It's documented that Coach Del Rio was, quote, grooming, unquote, Coach Norton for the defensive coordinator role, and even as he held the job. Think about that. Even as he held the job. That's according to Silver and Black Pride, February 6th, 2015 article. It's also widely known that Coach Del Rio wanted to bring in the Seattle/USC 4-3 style of defense to the Raiders, and Norton was the best person available other than himself to do so. Thus, Norton was an extension of Jack Del Rio. There are two kinds of defensive coordinators in the NFL. The ones who are there to reflect the head coach's way of playing defense, and the ones who are there to install their own brand of defense. The later kind of defensive coordinators have become stars. Marvin Lewis, Rex Ryan, Rob Ryan, and their father, the late Buddy Ryan, just to offer some examples. Then there are those like Norton, or Norton was, I should more appropriately say, but admittedly not so tied to the hip of their head coaches as Ken Norton Jr. was tied to the hip of Jack Del Rio. And therein lay the logical inconsistency, or the first one. Since Coach Norton was brought in to install Coach Del Rio's defense and was being groomed by Coach Del Rio, and since Coach Del Rio, Norton, and now newly elevated John Pagano were said to have equal roles in developing the defensive game plan, Del Rio should have fired himself as well as letting Norton go. As for Pagano, he is not a Seattle/USC 4-3 style defense specialist. He's a 3-4 defense guy. The most, again, logical move would have been to keep Norton, but switch roles between he and Pagano if a change of that type was really needed, okay? And frankly, it wasn't. The main Oakland Raiders defense problem that plagues it has been one that I have pointed to since the preseason. The defensive linemen come off the ball at a high stance and thus lose the leverage gain by being in a three-point stance. So they're more easily blocked. The opposing quarterback has more time to throw. That puts more pressure on the defensive backfield, which gives up passing yards, and at times often, as you would agree, in big chunks. On top of that, the Oakland Raiders defense lacks the more exotic blitzes that are the norm today. Attacks where specific gaps are overloaded with two defenders on a blitz, like the WA gap blitz that's quite talked about, at least for the past 2 years, as one example. The defense is a predictable alignment or set of alignments. No effort is made to use formations to emphasize strengths and cover up weaknesses. All of these problems were there from 2015 to today. And Jack Del Rio did nothing to solve them. The head coach just let Ken Norton Jr. take all the heat and then hired John Pagano, who was fired by the San Diego Chargers, and helped with the defensive backfield. That was the story. He was basically there, Pagano, to kind of look over Ken Norton Jr.'s shoulder and give a reason for the Raiders to fire Norton at some point. An excuse. Yet another African-American who didn't work out in the coordinator role. Same thing happened to Pep Hamilton. That's right, Pep Hamilton. He was the Indianapolis Colts offensive coordinator in 2013 and 2014, built one of the NFL's top attacks. But one bad year, 2015, and next thing you know, he's fired. And were it not for Cleveland Browns African-American head coach Hugh Jackson, hiring Pep as assistant head coach in 2016, he would have still looked for a position. And then Pep went to work for another friend and former boss, Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh, and signed a 4-year, $4.25 million contract. But that's in college football, which also is played by too few black coaches. Does Ken Norton Jr. have the same set of contacts and get him placed in a better situation? Time will tell. But the facts remains that if he were white, he'd have a better chance of getting a good job after the Raiders. Look at Greg Manuski. The current Washington Redskins defensive coordinator was also the Colts defensive coordinator before he was fired by head coach Chuck Pagano, John's brother. He was able to make a move to another NFL coordinator position, a lateral move. The Rooney Rule, which forces NFL teams to look at minority coaching candidates, has worked to a degree and produced more black coaches in the league than ever. But the fact remains that the vast majority of NFL players are black, and the vast majority of NFL management staff coaches are white. It looks like a slave plantation, and many of the fans seem to like it that way. Don't complain, just play, some so-called NFL fans say. In a way, it's a lot like the black World War II soldiers who fought for our country, only to return to face rampant racial discrimination. Their exploits were forgotten and not celebrated if America ever knew about them in the first place. This is the environment the Raiders have thrust Ken Norton Jr. into. A racist one. He was set up, straight out set up. A Rooney Rule hire who was asked to learn on the job and implement the coach's vision of defense, only to be fired for doing his job. Stay tuned. That's it. And subscribe to Zinny62. This is a message I wanted to get out there immediately. And I did because I am not done sending the message that what happened was wrong. And the Raiders should be called out for essentially using his brother as a scapegoat. That's exactly what they did to mask a bigger problem, okay? And I have no intention of basically, letting this go down without saying something about it. And I'm going to say something about it. Because when it comes to race, too often in media, a black voice or a person supportive of African Americans is shut down. And that's got to stop. Okay, it really has to stop. So, it's just straight up, okay? So, in order to make it stop, people have got to keep just talking about it, making noises about it, and saying, hey, look, this should not be. This simply should not be, okay? And yet, it is. So, what do we do? I mean, where is the Fritz Pollard Association, for example? Okay? What's the Fritz Pollard Association was supposed to support the hiring of African Americans in coaching positions? Where are they? I haven't seen them. Have you? Okay, I haven't. Where's the Fritz Pollard Association? Silent, all right? Scared to talk. Where is the black media? Who are they out there? Okay? If you have Jameli Hill with ESPN, the minute she says something that criticizes a situation like this, guess what? Her people tell her to pipe down. It's very important for there to be an active voice that speaks for those who cannot speak for themselves or are afraid to do so. And right now that voice is not truly active. You hear more about issues, because it's, I think on one hand, it's not that, you hear more about issues that are not impacting black males, all right, in a way that could help black males today. We talk about problems, but the problems still exist. We talk about the problem of police brutality, of unlawful racist jailing, but where are the statistics that show that these problems are going away? We talk about the problems of having a lopsided National Football League. You got all the blacks playing and, you know, precious few coaching. That could be changed overnight. Why is it so important to have a situation where anybody is on top of somebody else? If we really want to send a message that America is free and you have freedom of movement, you can be anything you want to be, how can you send that message when so few blacks are actually in those positions? You can't. Okay? You can't. And it's you, the fan, that is responsible for this. You, the fan, has to call for change. But you can't get on a person for criticizing it. You can't get on a player like Bruce Irvin for speaking his mind, because the message you send to Bruce is, you know, just shut up and play. He doesn't want to hear that at all. Show some support for those players, black players in particular, and black coaches who need it. Where are the fans for Ken Norton? It's like all you just sort of sat there like vultures, waiting for him to be, you know, thrown to the ground and munched on like he's a carcass. And you guys are munching on him. And that means seriously, that's exactly what it looks like to me. That's exactly what it looks like to me, okay? And so those of you who make these responses like Ken had to be let go for the D is ridiculous, because, again, Ken, and I've said this again and again and again, Ken Norton Jr. was asked to be an extension of Jack Del Rio. He wasn't asked to come up with anything original. That was his instruction. That was what he said. He said, hey, look, I am here to reflect what Del Rio wants and what we've learned in our playing time. I'll have some say over the play call, but he has input too. And then later, in another article, it was pointed out that John Pagano, Ken Norton Jr., and Jack Del Rio equally shared responsibility of the defense. So if the responsibility is really equally shared, why aren't they all equally fired? Okay? So what they did was like they brought the Rooney Rule guy. Oh, you gotta talk to a black guy. If the Rooney Rule says you gotta talk to a black guy, it doesn't say or minority. It doesn't say you have to hire them, but you have to talk. Okay? So here they bring in Ken Norton, they talk and they hire. All the while knowing they set him up to fail, because if it's Del Rio's vision and Del Rio's defense and he's the head coach is responsible at the end of the day, unless the head coach gives up responsibility, which he did not do, Del Rio, to player assignments. That is, who starts, who sits. The head coach makes that decision. But many of you blamed Obi's assignment on Ken Norton Jr. as opposed to Del Rio because of your own prejudices. And that's where I blame you guys for a lot of this. It's your fault. It's your fault for egging on the existence of this horrible situation and not being intelligent enough, to be frank with you, to analyze it and sit down and say, hey, you know what? It's Del Rio. You need to fire yourself, Jack Del Rio, and stop using Ken Norton as your crutch. All right? I say this to you who are calling out for Ken Norton to be fired, and what you were doing is you were assembling your own argument, okay, for yourself to fit your own prejudice rather than the fact. The fact of the matter is that Ken Norton Jr., you can look this up yourself, Ken Norton Jr. was hired to implement Jack Del Rio's vision of defense. Ken Norton Jr. never had his own vision of defense as a coordinator. This was his first job as a coordinator, and by his own admission and Del Rio's agreement, they were grooming Ken Norton Jr. for that job as he was doing the job, which is really weird. That is a really weird situation. And ultimately one that is a house of cards for Ken Norton Jr. He set up to fail. Last hired, first fired. House is burning, fire the black guy. They say we need to talk to a black guy. We'll drag our feet, and then finally we'll hire one. What was the difference between Pep Hamilton and Ken Norton Jr.? Well, Pep Hamilton was able to get on his feet because his black friend, Hugh Jackson, was head coach of the Browns and hired him. That's why. Because prior to that, Pep was head up to the CFL for a bit. Okay? So don't talk to me that race doesn't matter here. I don't want race to matter, and I would hope you don't want race to matter, but you can't not make race matter by not paying attention to it. You have to pay attention to the problem in order to stop the problem. You have to talk about the problem in order to figure out ways to make the problem go away. Not the reverse. It's not going to go away by you pretending like it's not there. It is there. Hugely. You can get mad, but you're not going to stop me from talking about it. Not ever. Until it gets better. Okay? So right now, the best course of action is for Ken Norton Jr. to land on his feet somewhere quickly. Defensive coach. Hopefully coordinator. You know, a position where he can, you know, be against his former team and exact some revenge. Maybe some smart coach out there who has the Raiders on their schedule will turn around and say, hey, let's go and get Ken Norton Jr. and see what the Raiders are thinking about defense, and we'll, you know, pick his brain a bit. That's the smart thing to do if a coach isn't racist. Okay? Just saying. That's the smart thing to do. Will they do it? It's another story. I'll be back with a normal one. I had no intention of taking anyone's comments on this stream. I wanted to make that point, and I'm going to continue to hammer it home until it sticks. Happy Thanksgiving.